The issue is it's a special breed to be a fighter, especially at that level. But it can't be your entire identity. That's how I've been able to bounce around and do different things. I never just say, "Oh, I'm a football player. I'm a fighter. I'm this. I'm that. I'm a comic podcaster." No, I like a bunch of different things, man. So I never just put myself in one lane. I'm okay, with getting backlash going, oh, he's not really into whatever it is, off-roading. He's not really into comedy. He's not really into podcasting. Oh, he's just a football player fighting. All good, man. People can do that stuff. So I think the number one issue is these fighters, they get so wrapped up on their identity as just as a fighter. There's some great personalities out there, man. Great personalities. And going back to your point, when guys have money and they don't need to fight, look at Connor. Figure it out, everybody. What do you think's going on? That guy is richer than freaking anybody that's ever fought in the UFC. Trust me, if he needed money, he'd be back in that octagon. He doesn't. So when people go, oh, is Connor going to fight? He doesn't owe us anything. He gave us one of the greatest runs of all time. He can do no harm to me. Like, he does no wrong in my book. So, the reason you're not seeing Connor fight is because he's sleeping in Gucci sheets, man. He's on a yacht. That's why you don't see him fight. This business isn't for the rich, man. It's just not.
So I always say a lot of times that I have old friends in this industry. My next guest is a very old friend in this industry. We go back before the Ultimate Fighter days. I should tell you how far we go back. Fox, podcast, interviews. He hosts about 19 different podcasts of his own. The Schaub Show, Fighter and the Kid. It is always a pleasure to speak to my old friend, Brendan Schaub. Brendan, what's going on?
Not much, brother. It's good to see you, man. We're the old heads now in the industry, man. It's just it's a young man's world. I'm just trying to keep up.
Dude, I remember, that's what I was thinking about. I was like, when did I first talk to Brendan? It was before the Ultimate Fighter, because we did like a correspondent thing for your season. We had you on like every week of the show. And I was like, that's how far we go back.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. And I cherish those times. As I get older, I have kids now. And, I was in Vegas last week for the Olympia. Rain and Monster brought me out there for a signing. And I had nothing to do. I got done at 4:00, which is rare for me. My kids aren't with me, So I was like, what the hell am I going to do? I saw there was a local fight at the Virgin Hotel. I think it might have been a Tough Enough. I don't even know. And I went and watched the early prelims and just, those days, I didn't realize at the time, but that was like some of the best times because nobody's famous. You're grinding. It's all about just the love of the sport. There's no sponsors. There's no, there's not the glitz and the glamour. So I sat in the back row and watched these young kids go at it, man. And, I love MMA. I just love MMA and I bleed UFC. So it's cool, man. It's cool that, we're still here. We're still somewhat relevant and doing our thing, man. Cause, a lot of guys can't say the same.
Absolutely. So obviously like all the things you're doing, Fighter and the Kid is still going, which is wild to me because we worked, when we kind of worked together a few years ago at a different outlet, I won't mention who it was. You were doing Fighter and the Kid back then, and like you're still killing it. You and Callan are still killing it with Fighter and the Kid all these years later.
Yeah, Callan's all relative, but we're doing the damn thing, man. Yeah, we were around before everyone their aunt had a podcast, man. I was the first professional athlete, especially first professional athlete who's active to have a podcast of the first ever. And then first kind of duo, when you have a professional fighter and a comic and, now it's been done a million times, but yeah, the thing's special, man. So it's just, it's a staple in the space and, we have a solid fan base and, Brian's like a very older brother to me. So it's just, it's not work. I can't believe I get paid to do it, and it's just so easy. And shoot, man, when I met Brian, I didn't have kids, so me and Brian, when I met you, I didn't have kids, so it's like, as you get older, you lose friends, for whatever reason, you lose friends. And, those ones that stick around, the people that stick around, it means a lot, so it's cool, man. It's cool. Just getting older, man. It's dad life now, brother.
I know. It's funny. I remember years ago when you were doing that show, and I knew you very well, but I really didn't know Callan. I was always thinking of Callan as like this big comic doing, the Hangover movies and everything. I'll never forget. He was coming. I'm in Columbus. He was coming to Columbus to do a comedy show. And you passed me his number. He said, yeah, just text him, dude. He'll get you in. I was like so nervous. I mean, dude, like Callan's like this big star. I texted him. He was like the nicest guy in the world, like the coolest guy in the world. I went to his comedy show and like, I was just like, oh, I wonder if he's going to like big time me. No, dude, Callan's like the nicest guy in the world. Like, he was so cool. He's like, oh, dude, come on down to the comedy show. And like, he got his good seats and everything. Like, it was awesome. But like, you just don't know. And it's funny because Rogan, I remember like meeting Rogan years ago. And like, I remember we all went out to dinner after, I think it was, I can't remember whose show we went to. We went to some comedy show when he was covering a UFC. And we went to dinner afterwards, and there's like 19 of us there at this dinner. Like, we're all just hanging out, and the bill comes, and like, I get my wallet out and get ready to pay. And then the lady walks away. She comes back. She's like, no, he took care of it. Rogan paid for everybody. Like, didn't say anything to us. Like, that's just the kind of guy he is.
Yeah. And to this day, I still do the companions. We do it at least once a month still. And I go down there next week. And we always go to dinner before, and it's impossible to try to pay for it. Like, to this day, he'll just cover it. I mean, he's a lot richer now, so I get it. But it's like, dude, I'm not a broke fighter, dude. Let me get it this once, But he's that guy, man. He's the best.
Absolutely. So you've got obviously a million things going on, but at least part of the reason that I reached out now when I did, because as much as you do, and obviously all the podcasts you do, I watched one of your recent episodes where you talked about your good friend Shane Carwin. We know everything that's been going on right now in this world with this antitrust lawsuit and all these guys right now. You were a guy that you got out early. Like, you didn't stick around and fight too long. And I know obviously I didn't realize, was it 2014? Was that the last fight? Was 2014?
Yep. Travis Brown, 2014 MGM.
Yeah, that's so wild. But like, you got out and now you've had this incredibly successful career after fighting. Beyond Shane, though, I'm sure you saw all these different statements, right? Guys, legends, Vanderlei Silva, all these guys in there. Does it break your heart when you see stuff like that? I mean, I guess that's part of the risk you take when you're a fighter. But at the same time, like, how can you not look at these legends and be like, man, it breaks my heart to see what they're going through?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, right? So I think for me, I know it goes on, and just like you, I've interviewed tons of people, man, a million fighters, and you can tell, like, some you're like, oh man, this is tough. Like, do we need to use subtitles or whatever, So, but it's also a thing too, and Luke Thomas and I were talking the other day. Like, I used to talk a lot about it, and then when you see like a lot of the fighters aren't on the same path, they're not on the same vibe. Like, whoa, dude, no, don't mess with our money. Like, when they're not fighting for it, you're beating a dead horse, and it's tough. It's also nuance, and there's a lot that goes into it because, let's say, and I'm not the face of this. I have nothing to do with it. Hopefully everyone figures their stuff out, but I can see both sides. As a business owner, I see both sides. Could they pay the fighters more? Yes. Other leagues that have tried to pay fighters more, are they around anymore? No. Like these other leagues that, try to compensate and do the right thing, it's just not the business model. And then also, let's say I was the guy saying, oh, I have CT. Thank God I don't show any signs yet. But, compared to Shane, I played football longer. I had more UFC fights than Shane. I had more knockouts than Shane, meaning getting knocked out. So, if anyone should have it, it should be me. But I don't. And thank God. So, I played football for a long time. So let's say I was the face of this, antitrust lawsuit, which is, again, I'm not. But if I'm the UFC, I'd go, how do you know you didn't get that playing football, dude? How do we know you didn't, you played tackle football since you're 6 all the way to your whatever it is, 24, 23. How do we know you didn't get it there? So it's just there's a lot that goes into it, man. And with the Shane stuff, again, I beat the dead horse about fighter pay and fighter rights, and no one's answering the call, so I don't really talk about it anymore. But when it comes to Shane, that's different. That hits different because that guy's was like an older brother. I came up with Shane, so that wasn't planned. My producer Chin brought it up. I'm like, man, you see this lawsuit, and Shane, has a affidavit, or he gave his whole spiel on it. So when he brought that up, all that was real. But I had no intention on talking about or anything like that, because again, I don't know what you can do, man. I really don't.
Well, and you mentioned in that segment, is true. Like, what guys did in sparring, and still some guys do, like, like they just go in there and, we've obviously, I think we've changed a lot over the last few years where guys are like, some guys just don't spar anymore. Other guys say like, I spar very lightly. And then you can see a guy like Sean Strickland who's going in there and just absolutely beating the shit out of people. Like, so like you said, like there's a reality there where like, it may not even be what you're doing in the fight. It can also be what you're doing in the gym, things like that. Like there's a reality there, because some guys don't train smart. Some guys still go in there and beat the hell out of each other in sparring sessions.
Yeah, me and Shane would be the first one to tell you we train like some meatheads, bro. Like I said, I was getting choked up talking on the show. Like there'd be times we'd spar and we'd call each other laughing because we didn't know how to get home. Like in hindsight, like dude, yeah, because you're concussed, dumbasses. But we thought it was funny. We'd fight, and then I'd jump in his car. And, you want to get some beat, and then he'd be like, "Yeah, let's get Chipotle," and then we wouldn't know how to get to Chipotle, and that was a joke back then. So I don't know, young, dumb, and crazy ambitions, and it comes with the territory. I wish I could come on here and have an answer for it. I don't know what you do, Damon. I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do. Maybe it'd be different. I'd be singing a different tune if I showed signs from it, but right now I don't.
I'm curious because we do like I've never been a big advocate of like telling guys they should or shouldn't retire. I think the one time I always remember doing that was back in the day when Ken Shamrock was still fighting, and I remember being like, dude, like I know it's not going to end well for you. You know what I mean? Like I just know this is not going to get any better. And I think he still fought after that. But we had those tough conversations, and you as a fighter, because you've gone through it, you have a better perspective, right? Like you're able, you can say things to fighters that I would never say because you are a fighter, you've been through it. But does it, like I'm sure you see guys now where you're watching like, God, like I wish this guy would walk away. Like we're having a situation right now with Tony Ferguson. Like Tony's a legend. I love Tony, but he's 41. He's on a 8-fight losing streak, and there's a couple of bad losses in there. And thankfully he's not been like totally been getting knocked out, but I think that Justin Gaethje fight, like I think he was never the same after that. Like I think that just like took a piece of his soul, and it kind of breaks my heart. I love Tony, but like, how do you have that conversation with the guy and say, dude, like I know you love it, but at some point, man, you got to walk away.
Agree 100%. But the guys that decide to fight for a living, they're not going to be the ones that decide that. They're just cut from a different cloth than the rest of society. So I think with guys like Tony, this is where I think the UFC could come in and maybe help out. Again, I don't know UFC's business model. They're crushing it, man. So I'm not giving them any advice. But when it comes to like Tony Ferguson or Nick Diaz, like Nick Diaz, Vicente Luque, no. What are we doing? If those guys want to fight and you want to honor them and honor their contracts and do whatever, it's their last fight, do this whole video montage for them, match them up so they're not taking that insane damage. Don't give them Vicente Luque. Why not do Nick Diaz, Tony Ferguson? What's wrong with that? Two guys clearly longer in the tooth, have some miles on them. Let them fight it out, man. But you don't throw them to these monsters. That's where I have an issue with it. But again, that's their business model. It seems to work. So what do I know?
What do you make of, I'm sure you saw the news, what do you make of Cowboy Cerrone coming back again? Like I know Dana's like, I love him, but I hate that he's coming back. Cause when he ended, he's like, I'm happy for him. I'm glad he's walking away. It's like, and I know Cowboy's a good dude, but like, there's just some guys who can't let it go. They just can't move on.
See, so I literally just talked to Cowboy before I came in here because, we both do off-road racing, and me and him were talking about some race stuff. And I mentioned, I said, "You're coming back, huh?" And he started laughing, and Cowboy's a different animal where I would assume the UFC gives him proper matchups. Like, don't toss him in there with these killers, he's a legend. He's earned that. So also what he's doing, because I'm on TRT, Cowboys on TRT clearly, and peptides and whatever. So I said, dude, I don't think people realize what you're doing is it's hard enough to be out of the game and then get back into it. But when you're on peptides and TRT, you've been for whatever years, and you got to get off of it, piss clean for 6 months straight. Like you're already against the odds here. I don't think people realize like his body's going to change completely. It's going to be like when you remember when USADA came in the UFC and you're like, oh, my favorite fighter looks very different. It's going to be like that, but on steroids, no pun intended. So it's like, what he's doing, it's against all the odds. It's hard enough if he just was doing his own thing and then came back. But when you're feeling that good, taking this stuff and your hormones are good, and then you got to get completely off of it, like that's a tough road, man. The other thing, this is how crazy, and I love Cowboy, this is how crazy his ass is. Cowboy has a very successful career outside the octagon. The only reason usually most of these guys go back is because they're doing it, because they're chasing that dragon. They want the fame, they want the eyeballs, they want that competition. They want the money. Cowboy doesn't need any of that. And that's how much he loves fighting. He goes, I just want to break that, the 50-50 club, 50 fights, 50, all-time finisher, all that stuff. So kudos to him. I hope they match him up right. If they announce his fight and he's just fighting some killer, we'll know what they think of him. But Dana loves Cowboy. And for Cowboy too, what's different is I was discussing this with him when I was in my truck. The amount of eyeballs he's going to bring to everything he's doing, his Can-Am racing and his off-road racing and his trophy truck racing and, all of the stuff he's doing in Dana's Nitro series, like that just adds value to Cowboy, so he's a little different, and he does have his wits about him. So I just hope they match him up accordingly.
Yeah, it's weird because usually what I understand, like I know like when Daniel Cormier retired, he told me, he's like, you'll never get that feeling again of what it's like to walk to that octagon and do battle with another person. He's like, there's nothing that can replicate that. And he told me like that's probably the hardest thing for me to give up because he's been a competitor since he was, 5 years old doing wrestling. He's like, that's the hardest thing for me to give up. But I've always said, like, I think a lot of guys, they get back into it because money, let's be honest, like that's how you make your money. It's hard to walk away and like suddenly you're not getting $100,000 paycheck at the end of a night. Like, I do a podcast with Matt Brown and even he's like, I've had to adjust. Cause like, I know I'm no longer going to get that $250,000 payday once or twice a year. I remember, and I know you've talked about this many times, like when you had that moment with Joe on his show, which because of maybe not publicly, I wish that would have happened, but you said like, but you had a career after this. We just talked about doing 1,000 podcasts, doing all the things you're doing. You could argue, and I don't mean, I'm sure you don't take offense to this. You could argue you've had a more successful career now out of fighting than you had in fighting, like all the things you've been doing.
Not even close. Not even close. Yeah.
So like, is there a world where like do more guys need like I wish the Joe thing and maybe happened off the air, and I know it's a long time ago, but like do more people need to have maybe that come to Jesus meeting with some fighters and be like, and also tell them like start thinking about long term, because you're right, like Cowboy's a weird one because he does have a career outside of fighting. He really is just doing it because he likes fighting, but most guys it's not that. Most guys you kind of get the sense they can't quit because they can't afford to quit.
Exactly. It's tough, right? Because when you're fighting, especially at that level, the UFC level, especially these days, everyone's so damn good. You have to be all in. I think when it comes to me in particular, especially when Rogan was talking to me, Rogan knew I had these other set of skills. So I think, not to take anything away from Rogan, I think he knew I was going to be successful outside of fight. He's like, dude, you can do all this stuff. Like, what are you doing? And he's right. He was 100% right. And at the time I was mad, but my family, my mom and my brother and my dad were so mad at him for doing that publicly. And I told them that. And then now they thank him. They call him, they thank him, it's because he's the one, that really helped me out with that stuff. But yeah, I think these guys, the fighters, the issue is it's a special breed to be a fighter, especially at that level. But it can't be your entire identity. That's how I've been able to bounce around and do different things. I never just say, oh, I'm a football player, I'm a fighter, I'm this, I'm that, I'm a comic podcaster. No, I like a bunch of different things, man. So I never just put myself in one lane. I'm okay, getting backlash going, oh, he's not really into whatever it is, off-roading. He's not really into comedy. He's not really into podcasting. Oh, he's just a football player fighting. All good, man. People can do that stuff. So I think the number one issue is these fighters, they get so wrapped up on their identity as just as a fighter. There's some great personalities out there, man. Great personalities. And going back to your point, when guys have money and they don't need to fight, look at Conor. Figure it out, everybody. What do you think's going on? That guy is richer than freaking anybody that's ever fought in the UFC. Trust me, if he needed money, he'd be back in that octagon. He doesn't. So when people go, oh, is Conor going to fight? He doesn't owe us anything. He gave us one of the greatest runs of all time. He can do no harm to me. Like, he does no wrong in my book. So, the reason you're not seeing Conor fight is because he's sleeping in Gucci sheets, man. He's on a yacht. That's why you don't see him fight. This business isn't for the rich, man. It's just not. So when these guys get fat and happy, again, this is an argument if I'm the UFC. It's like, hold up. If we give these guys the compensation you're asking for, we don't get as good fights. They won't fight as much. So it's a weird thing, man. I don't know what you do. I literally don't know what you do.
Yeah, it is. And I think, like, again, I think that long-term planning, like, again, going back to the Rogan thing, like, at that moment, he knew you had talent to do other things, and it's been proven true. Those last decade, all the things you've done, all the things you built. Some guys don't ever have that plan B, and I think that's the reality. Like, when I talk, because I did the podcast with Matt, like, Matt opened a gym a few years ago. That was kind of going. He opened a couple other businesses. He knew when he retired, he's like, I have other things going on. Now I have, he just remodeled his gym, got that going. He's coaching. He's got a couple other businesses he works on. I don't think a lot of guys have that long-term planning. Like when Rogan said that to you, he recognized, he said, look at Bray, I know what you can do. I know the talent you have in you. I wonder like it more, and I listen, not everyone's going to be you. Obviously not everyone can be Brendan Schaub. Not everyone can be Michael Bisping or Daniel Cormier, but having that planning, having that long-term planning, I think is something that escapes a lot of guys. Like they just think about, I got to train, I got to fight, I got to get that paycheck, then I got to train, I got to fight, I got to get that paycheck. They're not thinking a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road.
You know, to that point, it's one of the biggest elephants in the room when it comes to fighters is there's no criteria to be a fight manager. So like my manager came from entertainment, you know, his Lex McMahon, his dad was Ed McMahon. So he had a background in business. He's also a lawyer by trade. So, he passed the bar, which you can't say for 99% of the UFC managers or agents. So he's been down a different road. He's MC Hammer's manager. So I think he set me up for success, and that's why I had so much money in endorsements and all that stuff. So I had a lot of help. I wish I could take all the credit for it, but I had a lot of help with guys, surrounding myself with much smarter people that were planning for me outside of the octagon. Where these fighters, they might be in a stable full of 15 big names, and all they care about is your next fight, man. They're pushing these young fighters too soon just to get the bigger payday, which, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So I think a lot of it's just a sport in general. There's no, criteria to be a manager. Those guys most of them don't know what the fuck they're doing. So I think if they had more direction, more legit guys that actually pass the bar, have some sort of background in managing, professional athletes, it would help these guys out. Now, some of them do, and they're crushing it. And then some of them don't, and they get done and they're screwed. So it's just not a UFC problem. It's a problem across the board.
Well, I know, yeah, and I think that's the reality. Like I said, like this is you were going all the way back to Shane stuff, like you were talking about. Like this isn't just a UFC problem. Like this happens if you fought in PFL, happens if you fight at one championship, happens if you fight anywhere. That's the reality. Like I said, everyone has this same issue. It's just a matter of how you handle it. And like I see a cowboy, and I'm just like, I'm in my head, I'm like, why? Like, what do you? But I know Cowboy's a different breed, and as you said, he doesn't need it, but he just wants it, and that's a whole other argument. Like if I don't know Cowboy well enough to be like, dude, what are you doing? But obviously, his thing isn't a financial thing. His is just like, I love doing it. And how do you talk a guy out of that? How do you talk a guy out of just loving what he's doing?
Bro, I brought it up to talk him out of it, and by the end of it, I'm like, hell yeah, I can't wait. Like Cowboy Cerrone, it's like. And I just, I'm just different. Like, don't get me wrong. There's something I miss about fighting, but man, when you're racing, especially, I race UTVs. I race for Polaris. I do the Mint 400, California 300, stuff like that. Cowboy doing big boy races, man. The Nitro Circus, and he's in trophy trucks and class ones. Like he's doing big boy shit, man. Like it's intense. It's insane. Talking about 800 horsepower trucks, $1 million trucks. Like, if that's not getting your rocks off, dude, you got problems. But so we all have our problems, but that's just not enough for Cowboy. He has his ranch and he has his kids. I can't, I got an offer to fight in Game Bred. We had Jorge Masvidal and his manager Dean on, and I actually work for him now, but doing commentating. But that's how that came about. They offered me a fight, and I'm like, bare knuckle MMA, man. Like, yeah. And, I was like, oh, man, you don't have enough money. Like, there's no way. And he goes, well, give us a number. I gave him an outlandish number. And he was like, dead serious. Just looked at me and goes, okay. And I'm like, what? He's like, okay. And for a second, I'm like, well, shit, maybe I'll just hit the road now. I'll get some road work in now. Let's get going. That's an insane amount of money. And I just can't force myself to do it, man. I just get at 41, my kids, like I can't take another blow to the head, man. I'm good. I'm good. I don't need to be, Elon Musk or Cowboy Cerrone rich. I'm good, man. I'm good where I'm at.
That's wild though, that you're like, hey, give me a number. You're like, I gave you a number. They're like, okay. Like you got it in your head. You're like, damn, I didn't think they'd come back with that.
But then they're like, yeah, for that number, you're going to have to fight JDS or Derek Lewis. And I was like, oh, well, no, hard pass. Hard pass. Like, I don't need those problems, dude,
That's wild. That's so wild. Yeah, but that's the temptation, right? Like, because you've got such a big name, like someone comes calling, they're like, "Hey, man, like we know you could do big things for us." I know that temptation. I don't care where you are. I'm sure there's guys who've been retired for 20 years who are still like, you came to them and said, "Hey, man, I got a big paycheck and people love to see you fight," and they're like, "Well, maybe I'll think about it." Like that competitor never leaves you. It's not like you stop being You obviously race this up, like very famously on your Instagram. You have the video of you rolling the truck. Like you're still a competitor. You're just not in there punching for a living now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame I'm so big because, if like a Logan Paul or Jake Paul came about or KSI, sign me up, dude. When you're talking about the JDSs of the world, the Derek Lewises, hell no. No. Now some YouTuber, yeah, man, I'll play ball there and make all the money and get the views. But, to fight these actual killers, it ain't happening, man. I got kids, man.
I'm curious, your kids, I think one of your kids, they do baseball, right? Are any of them involved? Like, do you, cause like I played football my whole life, so I know football very, very well. I wrestled, I did jujitsu and things like that. I certainly never fought, and I just never had a desire to do that. But I know like people who play football, like a lot of them now with their kids, like, yeah, I don't want my kid playing football because I know because it starts early, man. Like when you play football, you're playing young. Do you let your kids do combat? Do you let your kids do contact sports?
So my oldest does jujitsu. My youngest, he's middle now. I have a baby girl who's 1, but my 4-year-old, they love to wrestle. But my 8-year-old was doing jiu-jitsu for a hot second, and then he got the baseball bug. So out of all the sports, the one sport I don't know dick about, he picks. But I have some connection in baseball, so I can help him out there. I coached his football team. We went undefeated, slight flex there, went undefeated. So he loves football. And then someone saw he had scored 4 touchdowns in his last game when we were undefeated. And one of the coaches came from the tackle football league, like, man, we'd love to have your son. He's a perfect tight end. I played football since I was 6, man, tackle football. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. And then when I got home, I'm like, all right, let's give it a year. Let's give it another year, get the skills down and flag. I love that he's into baseball. He's a bit of an outlier there. You always hope your kids are athletic. You just don't know. But I'm baseball dad now, man. Like he's on a travel ball team. He's on an all-star team down here in SoCal, and he's a stud, man. He has the body for it. So I'm baseball dad now. I'm balls deep in baseball, dude.
Yeah, it's weird though, because when you go through it, you have a different perspective, right? You're like, do I really want them to do tackle football at 7, 8 years old?
100%. And he's like, Dad, I'm gonna be the first ever current NFL player, and I'm gonna fight in the UFC. I'm like, you're not fighting the UFC, dude. It ain't happening, pal. You trust me, kids that grow up in Calabasas don't turn into UFC fighters. It ain't happening, pal. So hopefully, and I tell them like, hopefully, if you're fortunate enough to make it to the big leagues, MLB's guaranteed money, bud. No head trauma. That's what you want to focus on. Like that's your goal, pal.
Yeah, I know you because we're basically the same age. Like like when we were kids and you get like knocked the hell out of you in a football field, you just get up, shake it off, go back in the field. Like I did the dumbest stuff. Like when I played football, I did the dumbest stuff in contact sports because you don't know better. Now we know better, but back then you're just like, oh, I got my bell rung. Okay, sit down the bench for 5 minutes and go right back in again.
Oh, brother, we were meatheads. I remember at University of Colorado, they had a play called 96 Power, and they put me in at fullback and the outside linebacker just be like an ISO with me and him, and we just collide heads. He was the hardest hitter. I was the hardest hitter. And for that week, it would be like, hard hitter day, and they literally show the film of me and him just lighting each other up over and over. And, I got my bell rung nonstop during that. And we'd all laugh and be like the highlight of practice. I look back on it now, I'm like, what the hell was I doing, man? And I literally look forward to that. Like I'd be in, whatever his 8th period, like, oh, I can't wait to, light up Iwu, who went to play for the Chicago Bears. Like, this isn't a small dude, man. And that was the highlight of my college career. It's like being the guy that was down to get his bell rung. I look back at it now, I'm like, what the hell was I doing, dude?
We talk about the kind of cautionary tales. I'm curious because I know you talked about this on your podcast because we have a big fight coming up in November. John Jones and Stipe, and it's pretty much like everyone's assuming it's a retirement fight for both of them. I get the feeling maybe more so for Stipe because I think everyone knows, like win or lose, this is probably the last one for Stipe. But the big question around John is, he's 38, still the best in the world, greatest of all time. And I know you mentioned this on your podcast, and I think you're right. Like the fight to make, the fight that no one's going to want to hear about right now because everyone's talking about Tom Aspinall, and I love Tom Aspinall. But John Jones, Alex Pereira is like the biggest fight the UFC, like without Conor around, that is the absolute biggest fight in the world they could promote. And to be honest, like this is not a knock on Alex. That is an easier fight for John than Tom Aspinall, because he's a smaller. So like I don't know, like with the because we have this weird thing where like when guys like a George St. Pierre walks away on top, leaves as champion, we can't leave him alone. We're like, when are you going to fight Khabib? When are you going to fight this guy? John has a chance to beat Stipe and go out on top, but yet I'm still kind of like, but like there's this other fight I'd like to see.
One more, bud. One more. Don't leave yet. One more. And also for John, like. I think if these GOATs, right, GSPs of the world, the Khabibs, if they had a potential to fight a guy like Alex, where he's so inefficient at grappling, and John's such a good grappler, like, bud, the writing's on the wall. Not only will it be a huge payday, but it's also probably it's easier than Stipe, probably. Stipe can wrestle his ass off. Even though he's older, he can fucking wrestle at Cleveland State. So I think John would be down for that. Because and I talked to John. We had a appearance together at Monster a while ago, and he was like, "Yeah, man, I'll do this fight, and then unless there's a big name out there, I'm done until the division gets bigger or there's some big superstar fight. I'm done." So okay, well, Alex is the biggest fight we can make, bud. There you go. So I think he has a real good chance of happening. Now, no shade to Aspinall. I think he's the best heavyweight in the world. I think you'd probably beat both guys maybe in the same night, but. That's the way the business goes, man. It's what's good for business. And Alex, you look at his three potential opponents, he's an underdog in every fight. So if you're going to diminish that star, you might as well do it against the GOAT at heavyweight, where we go, that's just John. And then you get him back on the win streak. That's how I would play it.
Yeah, and the thing about and I love Tom Aspinall. I've interviewed him before. Incredibly nice guy. As you mentioned, I mean, he very well may be the best heavyweight in the world. But I said this the other day on my podcast. I said, remember 2 years ago, all we could talk about was John Jones versus Francis. That's the only fight we cared about. It's the only one we wanted. We've forgotten all about Francis, and now it's just Tom Aspinall. That's the only fight. That's the sport, man. There's always going to be another guy. There's always going to be the next guy that you could fight versus like an Alex, which is right now, that would just be astronomical. Again, I think it's the biggest fight the UFC could promote that doesn't involve Conor McGregor. I think John Jones, Alex Pereira is like a monster fight. And that's not a knock on Tom. Talent-wise, Tom's the man right now, but he just doesn't present as much like hoopla as a Pereira fight, because there's always going to be, like I said, we were all about Ngannou 2 years ago. Now we're all about Aspinall.
I know. I think Alex John's bigger than any Conor fight, unless they brought Nate Diaz back, unless they did like a BMFL title, if Max Holloway beat Topuria, something like that. Conor versus Max for the BMF title would be insane. But let's say it's like Dan Hooker, who I absolutely love. But if it was Conor, Dan Hooker, insert Conor, his original opponent, Michael Chandler, Alex John, I think, beats those numbers, man. I think it'd be a big, big boy fight. I think it'd be so dope.
What do you make of Conor talking about doing bare knuckle?
Again, why? You got a Lamborghini yacht. What are we doing? Bare knuckle for what? And you got kids, man. You got little kids at home. I'm just cut from a different cloth, Like if one of my companies sells, dude, the only way you'd be able to hold of me is a landline. There he is. There, come in here. Damon was just talking about you.
Who was?
Damon Martin.
Hey, Dave.
He went to your show in Ohio.
What's up, buddy?
There he is.
What's going on, Brian? How are you?
Just a man. What's going on? What are you guys doing? A podcast?
We're doing a little interview here. We haven't caught up in a while. I was just catching up with Brendan.
Good. I'm glad I wore my lilac sweatshirt. It tends to bring out my eyes.
I was talking good about you at the start of the show. I was saying, like, when I first met you, I was like, I wonder if he's going to be like a rock star and he's not going to like want to talk. And I sent you a text about coming to your show here in Columbus, and you're like, dude, come on out, come to the show. And I was like, nicest guy in the world. I was like, I thought he was going to pull the rock star card. No rock star card there.
No. I'm the guy who gets recognized, and I keep the person there longer than they want to be.
Yeah, they're like, okay, enough, dude, enough.
Any more questions?
But talented. So we were talking about how fighters come out, they're around too long, like a Tony Ferguson or Nick Diaz, and Cowboy announced he's come back for 2 more fights. I just talked to him before this, and like in my case, I had options, so I left. Yeah. I'm never coming back. Cowboy, he's crushing it, man. He doesn't need to do it, but he's coming back. So we're talking about like. I was saying one of the major issues is like the management. Like there's no criteria to get into being a UFC manager.
Yeah.
And I had Lex, who's passed the bar, legit lawyer, had experience with other entertainers. So he kind of set me up for success after. All these guys are fighting for money.
Yeah, I was with Cowboy though at a UFC recently when Cejudo
Utah.
fought. Yeah, no, this was the one before when Cejudo fought Merab. And I think, where was that? Was that in Vegas?
Yeah, that's where they sat you 7 rows back.
Yeah. And
they put the power slap in front of them.
No. It's when I was it was actually cage side. I was cage side.
I don't remember.
And I went over and I said hi to Donald. And Donald, I think that was the one. I've been 3 recently, but Donald was sitting there and it was all this excitement. And I said, "Do you miss it?" He goes, "I want to fight again. I want to fight." So Donald, I think, is probably that the juice you get from fighting and competing, the attention, that's hard to let go of. It really is. And he was such a character and such a bright light for the UFC.
But we're saying Donald's not one of those guys
that got nothing to prove.
But he gets he's racing $1 million trophy trucks.
Still a fighter.
Yeah, I get
still a fighter. Still wants that juice.
He's also more famous than ever.
Yeah, he still wants to compete.
But outside fighting, it's just Donald.
Yeah.
I said most guys I try and talk out of. But after talking about him, I can't wait for Donald's fight. I can't wait for.
Well, he's got a new head of hair. He's on TRT to his own.
He has to get off of all that.
I know. We'll see what happens. He'll still have a good full head of hair. He should fight with his hair in his eyes.
You should go to his doctor.
Why do we have to bring him in? Why do we have to? What happened?
Sorry, man. Sorry, dude.
I'm sure you guys are probably getting ready to do a podcast, so I'll get you out here. But it's so funny you walked in, Brian. I want to bring this up. I was going to bring this up to you, Brendan, before I let you go. So I've watched Fighter and the Kid for years. We go back to the Fox days, all those kind of things. When I talked to you yesterday, Brendan, for some reason, this is the algorithm. This is the scary thing about our algorithm in the world. I talked to you yesterday. I go on TikTok later that night, and a clip from your show pops up. So obviously Big Brother is listening, but it was the clip of your show with Bobby Lee. The infamous,
like the most viral clip ever.
And I died laughing then. I died laughing when I saw it 2 years ago, and I died laughing again. It is still the funniest podcast clip I think I've ever seen in my entire life.
Bobby's always hilarious. Did you see the recent one with Theo Vaughn, where Theo said he asked him a question about how Asian Americans are going to vote? And Bobby, with a totally straight face, looks at him and goes, "Can I ask you a question? You know I'm not the president of all Asians, right?" He's just, everything he says is hilarious.
Yeah, it's like the most viral podcast clip ever, dude. I mean, it pops up on my feed probably once a month.
Yeah.
Big Brother was listening. It was just so funny. Like, I just talked to it, went on TikTok. I was like, dude, it's so hilarious. And I've seen it a million times. I still sat there and watched it again because the reaction you guys have in that moment, I die laughing every single time.
I'm trying not to laugh every time he and I are around anything like that. God forbid we're around somebody who is having a problem. I mean, it could be, and they could be on fire. And if they're complaining, it's very hard for the two of us not to, because I know he's looking at me, then I'm looking at him, and then the next thing you know, if somebody walks in with a toupee,
which has happened, and we lost the sponsorship off of it. Yeah.
It's we're bad people at the end of the day. Like, we love people, but God forbid, like if the Hunchback of Notre Dame walked in, we'd be like, of course we want to make sure that person feels safe and at home, and we'd love them, but it would be,
they're going to get these jokes.
Yeah, it's going to be a thing.
Too funny, man. Too funny. Well, Brandon, Brian, good catching up with you as well. Brandon, it's always a pleasure, man. Obviously, keep killing it what you guys are doing. I was telling Brandon, I was like, the Fighter and Kid, like, that's like the longest running show. Like, you guys are still doing it. That's so awesome.
1967, baby. We're still going.
Yeah, we've been doing it on second.
Before they had sound, we were the silent podcast.
Yep.
Do like cue cards in the air. Like, here's what we're saying right now.
Yeah. Everybody has, my dentist has a podcast now. So when we started, almost nobody did. I remember my agent saying, "What is a podcast?" Didn't even know what a podcast was.
Well,
so yeah.
But make sure, Matt, I said, "What's up, man?" I love that, dude.
Absolutely. Guys, appreciate it, Brandon. It's always a pleasure, man. Obviously, you guys keep killing, doing what you're doing, and let's not wait so long before we do another one of these.
That's what I'm saying, brother. We got to do it more, man. Anytime. You got my new cell.
Absolutely, man. We'll talk soon.
All right, brother. Take care.